The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Welcome back to another episode of the Success in Practice podcast. Today I'm joined by Robert Fendall. Robert Fendall stands as a prominent figure in the osteopathic profession, bringing over 40 years of clinical experience and a history of leadership to his practice and to the profession. Robert graduated from the International College of Osteopathy in 1985. He later graduated with a postgraduate Masters of Science in Osteopathy, specialising in paediatrics in 1997 from RMIT. Robert has successfully established and managed two multidisciplinary clinics, CBD Health, Sydney and Paddington Medical Centre for 36 years. He now enjoys his small private practice from Macquarie Street in Sydney CBD. His full-time clinical career has all happened alongside 25 years of service to the osteopathic community between 1990 to 2015, where he contributed to multiple regulating and governing boards shaping the direction of osteopathy in Australia. Robert's board positions include inaugural chair of the Osteopathy Board of Australia for APRA, inaugural president of Osteopathy Council of New South Wales, the inaugural president of the New South Wales Osteopaths Registration Board, and inaugural vice president for the New South Wales Chiropractors and Osteopaths Board for New South Wales Health. During his time, he saw the establishment of new osteopathic courses at Victoria University, Southern Cross University and University of Western Sydney. These achievements underscore Robert's unwavering commitment to the advancement of the osteopathic profession. In 1992 to 94, Robert served as president of the Australian Osteopathic Association, now known as Osteopathy Australia, establishing its first office and team of staff. In 2015, he was honoured as an honorary life member by Osteopathy Australia, a prestigious acknowledgement of his enduring impact and legacy. Robert has three grown-up children with fellow osteopath Julie Fendall. He competes nationally and internationally in rowing and cycling and remains a passionate snowboarder and a wannabe sailor. Robert, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on. And
Thank you, Sami.
mate, it's finally it's good to sit down and have a chat and get to know you.
And you as well. And it's been enjoyable listening to some of the previous podcasts. And thank you very much for going to the effort to reach out and meet people who've been.
That's okay. My pleasure. It's there's always a back and forth on the email, but finally it's good to kind of sit and have a chat like the old days rather than letting technology get in the way. I want to start by just getting a bit about your background and your history. In terms of, growing up, where you grew up and your early years as a young man, and then what finally led you to osteopathy.
Okay. So I was born in New Zealand, born in Auckland, lived all my time until high school in Dunedin. The brief version is I've ended up moving to Australia, finishing high school in Sydney. I then went to study osteopathy at the Windsor College of Osteopathy, and in my first year it changed to become the International College of Osteopathy. I graduated from there in 1985 and then started practicing, where I went to work in around Sydney, a couple of the suburbs there, including Glebe, Ultimo, Leichhardt, Cowra, and Darlinghurst, and ultimately Paddington, and then the city. I think that's basically the outline. How I got into osteopathy, it was a roundabout story. I had a very good friend at school who was very keen to become a chiropractor or an osteopath. He wasn't sure. His parents were seeing a prominent osteopath of the day called Alec Burton, and they felt that osteopathy was a more rounded profession, and they thought that that was a good way forward to work in the healthcare profession going forward. And like a lot of things we did in the day, we kind of hung around with each other doing work experience, and as he went along to get some experience and understand a bit more about osteopathy, I kind of tagged along, and I became quite interested in that on the side, but not realizing it. I thought I'll go down the road of being an accountant or a more commercial sort of thing. I was influenced a lot by economics of the day, and I thought, I'd like to do economics as well. When it came to the crunch at the end of school, I was interviewing for a cadetship with a great big accounting firm. And as I went through the interview process, it became clearer and clearer that that wasn't for me. And I was very happy that I sort of stepped away from it. At the same time, I was still watching my friend go closer and closer to getting into osteopathy, or becoming an osteopath, or thinking about becoming an osteopath. And I suddenly started to get more and more interested, thinking, actually, I really like that more than I like the accounting and stuff like that. Long story short, I came across the Windsor College of Osteopathy run by Ivan Lullerman, and went through an interview process which was pretty relaxed and casual in the day. And it came down to why not give it a go, and a bit like mud on the wall, if it sticks, you stick to it kind of idea. So that's really how it all got started. I hadn't had a treatment from an osteopath. I'd met some osteopaths along my journey with some of the friends, but I was straight out of school, knew nothing, knew really not very much about life or what I wanted to really be as a person, and that all started to happen in those first few years of studying osteopathy. So very grateful that I stumbled into it, and it took a while before I sort of thought, this is for me. So very impressive. I suppose I haven't been fixed by some amazing osteopath. Haven't been, cured, or watched someone, cured that couldn't get off the floor. Nothing impressive like that.
It's not an uncommon thing. I've had a chance to sit down and talk to many prominent practitioners, obviously doing this podcast, and it's a very common thing that people just knew nothing about osteopathy and fell into it. It's probably, that's my story. I knew nothing about it and I fell into it. But it's amazing how quickly it hooks you and gets you kind of involved and passionate as well. I mean, I don't know of any other profession that kind of pulls out as much passion out of you as osteopathy does out of the people that really cling on to it. I talk to engineers and accountants and so forth, and I don't see a similar kind of passion in their speech anyway. One thing I want to ask you, and it seems like that there's some common personality traits amongst osteopaths, obviously empathy and conscientiousness and some kind of, I guess, some sense of agreeableness where they would have compassion for patients and for the people they work with. Did you find that you had certain personality traits that, now looking back on it, that kind of allowed you to become an osteopath? Like, were you that kind of person as a young boy, as a teenager, or was it totally out of left field?
It's a good question. I think one of the things I know today is that I love going to work. I love the first patient coming in, particularly if I get there before they do. And I just really enjoy working with people. And I think that was one of the standout features. And before that, when I think back to it, perhaps the feedback I get from all those part-time jobs we have as kids, working in Kentucky Fried Chicken was one of mine, and I remember caddying on a golf course. I got to know the people that I directly worked with, and it became almost a friendship. It became a sort of a connection where there was a bit of instant trust or instant liking, and I guess the ones I didn't like or wasn't enjoying, I didn't stick with. But the ones that I did stick with for long periods of time, it was quite big. One of the early jobs I did as a student coming into osteopathy was working in a nursing home, and the only time I could do it was working night shift. And night shift involved, patients finally getting off to sleep, turning lights down, last drinks, that kind of stuff, making sure they've been to the bathroom, and then waking them up in the morning and getting them going for the day, serving breakfast, that kind of thing. And it was really lovely to start recognizing that you were the life that the patients were enjoying. I was probably there helping them living in their last home for many instances. And I think the relationships that I formed then, just getting to know them all, and a little bit of chit chats and a little bit of family history they'd spill out when you met them, it just seemed to be more interesting than the job itself. And it meant, you kept doing it and you just wanted to see it. And it's very sad, of course, because a number of them over the years of that period of time died. And you come to work, for me, it's only 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes 2 days. And they weren't there when you came back. So that's quite distressing as well. But I think with patients, when I started to work in the student clinic, there was instant rapport with the people that we were, seeing and working with. And you're making me edge up the old memories. And there's a patient that I saw not so long ago, probably a couple of months ago, and he reminds me that he first saw me in the student clinic, which is over 40 years ago or thereabouts. And you just go, wow, he's obviously been involved with osteopathy as long as I have. It's quite a nice thing you can see.
Yeah. And I guess, tell us about your university years or the college years. What really defined those years for you? Who were some of the people that that you felt had a great impact on your particular education? And what are some of the things that really stuck with you that you still carry to this day? And tell us about some of the characters that you would have come across too, because I think that it's important that the listeners get a good record of the history.
Us not mentioning the elephant in the room, Ivan Lollerman.
Yeah.
And
the elephant in the room is more to do with the size of his personality.
And I think Ivan was larger than life, and I think the passion that really it oozed out of the man was the thing that carried the college in the tough days at the beginning, and certainly carried a lot of the students that went through. We were kind of smitten with his enthusiasm and his passion for osteopathy. And I think that he attracted good faculty, and the loyalty and the passion that went with that just spoke reams. And there was some great non-osteopaths. Greg Kesby was our anatomy lecturer, and he was teaching anatomy at New South Wales Uni. He made sure we got into the wet labs and we did a lot of specimen work. And it was kind of like he would have been an osteopath if he could have been an osteopath kind of guy. And I think he was smitten by Ivan's enthusiasm and passion, and he went above and beyond the carriage of duty, I suppose, to make sure that we really learned anatomy. Peter Cash was a standout. Steve Porter was a standout. So many others. Glenda Parrish was our visceral teacher, and she was an amazing osteopath and a great lecturer as well. And David Vivian Jones was probably the anchor for physiology, and he was just a brilliant person, and great osteopath and very good teacher. So we were very blessed because they were probably paid to do their job. It wasn't really across all of that, but they really went further than they needed to make sure we really understood what they were talking to. And I think that was one of the differences. And we learnt the sciences, we were taught very well for the day, and we got heaps and heaps of clinical, practical examples of what they were talking about. And I think that kept it alive. You know, we didn't have the flashy backing of the huge university. We probably had to support ourselves with jobs to make sure we could not only survive but also pay the fees for the college, because there was nothing free. And there was a need to kind of, you know, really sort of get your bang for buck, if you like, in terms of the money that we were paying for the college. And I think that kind of really came out in terms of the value that the teachers were giving us. We felt that we were getting that value, and we felt that it was all very worthwhile.
Did you get a sense that this particular project, you know, the college, the International College, was it a project obviously that was born out of you know, a desire by some of those names that you mentioned to really just give back to the profession? I mean, were they looking at kind of the big picture in terms of greater education? And I know a lot of the program, I mean, the International College program eventually, I think, became the program at RMIT. I think they kind of took that model and shifted it there. And I know that the UWS model was based on something very similar to it in terms of the course structure. Was that, did you ever get a sense that that was part of their vision, or were they just doing it at the time because they just wanted to give back and make sure that they'd left the profession in a better state than they received it?
I was never privy to those kind of conversations in the day. I was just a young student. In fact, I think in my year, I was the only school leaver. Everyone else was a mature student, and most of the students in the college that I was knew going through were all coming from other walks of life. They've been, you know, late 20s, early 30s. So they'd done something beforehand, whether it was in the music profession, industry, or whether it had been some kind of completely different profession, law in some cases, and some had done some science as well. But most of them were coming from a mature background. So there was a kind of connection for them and the teaching staff, because there wasn't that many years apart between them. I think the drive was to survive in the first instance. There was this, you know, threat that was always in the background, that we were so small that we couldn't keep going as a profession. And there was a sense out there that we were going to be either swallowed up or just never exist against the larger chiropractic profession. And so it was always this background idea that we were the poor people in the healthcare profession that really we were struggling to have an existence. So that was driving and fueling the teaching and the passion that went with the sort of the setup of the college. When I started, there was a big schism with the separation between two partners that started the Windsor College. That was Brian Lambert and Ivan Lullerman. Their background was that they came out of the Ashfield Sydney College of Chiropractic and Osteopathy. It was originally the Osteopathic College, and I think Ashfield then became Summerhill. And that was kind of an early teacher was Wal Brown. He taught both Ivan and Brian from the stories we heard. And they basically had a big disagreement when it became more chiropractic. And it became more chiropractic, I think, because there was a big influx of American sentiment around chiropractic in the day. They felt that that was the future for the healthcare profession, the manipulating profession, if you like. And they saw themselves as, you know, carrying that mantle. And I think, you know, with all due respect to them, that they did a good job, and they've kept the chiropractic profession growing. They're very large, they're very cash rich, on the same day that we were sort of trying to get a college or keep a college together and keep a practice. And then I don't really know the reasons. I was a bit it was below my pay grade, if you like, to know what was really going on between Brian and Ivan, but they had practiced for quite some years and had a passion for teaching osteopathy. They're both very good teachers. But Brian felt that he just wanted to run a sort of more a private practice business, teaching by the table. And Ivan felt that no, to have a future, we needed to create a school. So I think that was the sentiment behind that. When they moved from Edgecliff in the beginning, when I joined to become the International Colleges up in Oxford Street, Bondi Junction, everything took on a more formal educational kind of precinct, and the proper classrooms and a commercial building. Their practices were next door to the classrooms that we were learning from. So there was a lot of support from the practice of both, well, it was Ivan, Peter Cash and Robert Goodsell who were the three then. Roman Mazak joined them when he graduated. And then I think John Abdullah in the practice, but they had then moved to East Sydney Leagues Club Tower up in the top of Bondi Junction. And then the college had re-established itself at Barker Street near the hospital over at Royal Women's in Randwick. So very sort of boring housekeeping around that sort of stuff. But really the question of the course was one that the course to survive and gain accreditation became an accredited postgraduate program after the years I finished. And that was happening at the same time that there was work being developing the location or a university program at UWS. And I think all the teaching faculty, certainly the main teaching faculty, people like Peter Green, came from the ICO training. So it made sense that they would pick up the curriculum that was there and use it as a sort of a foundation document for the beginning of the curriculum. But I would say that, I would be certainly that to say that the curriculum developed by UWS would have been developed by UWS and the course advisory committees and so forth. So it would have taken on a very a more university flavour than the college flavour that we came out of, and a much better education. There was no doubt about it. You guys had you stood on our shoulders, I guess, and had a superior education. And it goes on to say today that the graduates that are coming out of the university courses today are just infinitely better trained in terms of the knowledge base that they were being exposed to than we were for the time that we spent in college. Our course was a 4-year course. A lot of the time was being taught at a part-time basis. And then it went on to be a 4.5-year course. I did a 4.5-year program, and then we didn't have accreditation. We had to get registered by examination, which was a whole journey in itself. So,
yeah.
And then in the background, it comes back to that disagreement between the chiropractors who had all the authority, all the influence, and all the money, controlling what would be our destiny, if you like. So there was tension or friction often, and I dare say it evolved from one of direct confrontation for some of my teachers and the chiropractors of the day to one of a more collaborative approach to work together to get ourselves out from each other's influence, I suppose.
It's probably one of the reasons why they decided to go with UWS over Macquarie University. I think back in the day that was an option as well. Robert, I want to take you back to some of your education as a student, and more specifically your osteopathic education in terms of your rationale, your thought process. When you were being taught that by either Ivan or Peter or whoever was teaching you that, Steve Porter as well, I guess at the time, what was their reflection like on some of the historical aspects of osteopathy, even dating back to Dr. Still's teaching? Like, did all of that kind of seep through the texts that you guys were exposed to, the actual discussions? You know, one of the inspiring things for me as a student was just sitting down and listening to my teachers just talk about their clinical life and then relate that back to principles and rationale. Tell us about that experience with some of those characters that you described, like Ivan and Steve Porter and Peter Cash. What was it? Was there a lot of historical background there, and a lot of kind of emphasis on osteopathy as a principled practice and as a philosophy?
Oh, most certainly. I think the more we got into the learning of osteopathy, away from the basic sciences, the more it drifted into understanding how Still saw osteopathy from the beginning, and reaching into that kind of work. I think that one of the big shakers and movers texts that we were working from came with the teaching of Steve Porter, who in his final year of study got hold of Mitchell, Moran and Peruso, and understanding muscle energy work, and really pulling that apart. One of his students was an engineer, and they really went to town pulling it apart, learning the biomechanics and working that together.
I think Steve was an engineer too, wasn't he? Background was in
Steve
engineering?
had an engineering background, but when I knew Steve and he was teaching, he was also working as a fireman. So
Right.
he had a big sort of dual career as a fireman, because he could do that after hours, and have a good income as a student, and study osteopathy in the day. So and do a lot of reading at night. But all of them, it was always straight back to anatomy. So into the yearbooks, into the texts, and then pull out some examples of some of the treatment that they were looking at and understanding. And that's, in all fairness, that's the only resource they had access to. So we didn't have the lineage of the English-trained osteopaths who probably had more and more years of experience and a little bit more earlier exposure to some of the American osteopaths. And none of that came into my learning until I finished college. We had Alan Becker visit the college, and some of the stories that he was able to tell, and he was brothers with Roland Becker, and Roland Becker was the two Becker brothers were big students of Sutherland, and really sort of had a deeper insight into the history around osteopathy. And I think when I look at the richness of how we were influenced to learn, it was coming from a smattering of stories that some of our teachers had picked up from their learning across the years, that inspired us to go and get into the books and do our own reading. And we got access to a copy of all the yearbooks from the American Academy, and we started to do our own copies of those. I've got a set. One of my classmates was Jeff Morrison, and he and I split a set between us. And getting into those articles and those journal articles of the day, and then starting to try and understand how they taught themselves and started to work. It may have been out of date because it was sometimes written 50 years before, but it got us thinking. And for the time that we were going through, that's what we had to work with. So we're kind of, I guess, a little bit poor on material. We didn't have a lot of material to work with. And so we're very reliant on being guided by some of the more senior experienced practitioners. And fortunately, they had enough stories, I guess, for us to start a story. It's great.
Yeah, right. That's just interesting to get, I guess, you picture yourself back in the classroom and having people talk to you about osteopathy, and I guess relate it back to some of the philosophical aspects of osteopathy. And I was just asking that question because I was intrigued to have you go back as a student and then wonder about the people that told you the stories. And I guess that's how the osteopathic tradition needs to stay alive. I think we still need to have that. We can't just rely on texts and books. I think it's important that we have those clinical stories that have osteopathy kind of weaved through them. It's very inspiring for students to hear that, and I think it's something that should be retained as much as possible. Robert, I want to ask you about, I guess, the early career life that you had once you graduated. Tell us why you chose to take the path that you took and go into kind of private practice, and where did you practice? And, did you practice with other osteopaths? Were they, did they offer you mentoring, or did you just kind of go out on your own and off you go? Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you, and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
So we finished. So it's really more important to. My experience was the way we finished our college course was to prepare for the board exams, and these exams were run by the Chiropractic Board, and they had the duty to register us as safe practitioners. A lot of my teachers had been grandfathered in, so Ivan, Peter Cash, Robert Goodsell had all been grandfathered in because they were practicing before 1978 when the new act came in, which was the first act of protecting the chiropractic, and ultimately osteopathy got added in the 11th hour, and they had this responsibility to examine osteopaths and register them. Those exams through the years when I was studying, each year was completely different. So we had no idea when we got to do ours on whether or not that was going to be the way it was the year before. Essentially, it was quite a loaded written paper, and then it was followed by a Viva exam. And the Viva exam was basically the area where they could or they seemed to pass or fail. In my case, I failed my board exams, as did more than, I think, 70% of the students attending. And there was a strong bias to those who were very pro-chiropractic getting through, and those who were very adamant that they didn't know anything about chiropractic and didn't want to be called a chiropractor. So just to be clear, at that time, there were many, we call them DCDOs, so they were chiropractically trained, and they were allowed to have an osteopathic qualification, diploma of osteopathy.
There's a few that still exist.
As an advertising vehicle, basically. And they were basically allowed to say that there was no difference between the two professions. And so that thinking, that sentiment was coming through the board exams, and this was a way of weeding us out. So we came out, I was shocked that I failed. I'd done the work. I thought I was good enough to pass. I passed my written, I know that. And I was stopped at the Viva. And I remember it was suddenly I had a couple of locums lined up, and suddenly legally I couldn't do them. And so what was I going to do? I was letting these practitioners down. I couldn't, that was the end of my career. I had to do the board exam, get registered, or I couldn't work. For me, I've developed a massage practice on the side, which helped complement my fees and earning an income. So I had a good number of patients that I'd see regularly, and I was, very fortunate that I'd had that experience. I think you can't get enough hands-on experience as a student, and that really gave me an understanding that I still appreciate today. And at that time, I sort of had to fall back on that. I wasn't allowed to call myself an osteopath. I wasn't allowed to practice as an osteopath. So back to the books, we had to do what they called a bridging course, and they had to run another public exam for us, which was an adjunct to that original exam. There was a large cohort of us because the Pacific College, which was originally the St Leonard's College of Natural Therapies, had a large number of students. I think George Stillian was one of those teaching there. In fact, he had to sit the board exams. And Michael Mahan-Licht was another student colleague of mine who we were sitting the exams together. And I think we were all appreciative of doing the work and doing the exam in the end. But to go out into practice after, we were just spent. Any thoughts of working for another practitioner was just lost in those years. So for me, I didn't have the experienced practitioner to work with. I didn't have the offer. The jobs just weren't there. The first few jobs, they're obviously taking new younger students coming through, and they had a responsibility to those. I worked as an associate, or as a soft tissue student to Ivan for a couple of years. I worked with Peter Cash and Robert Goodsell, and then those positions were replaced by younger students going through. That's where that was coming from. I went out by myself. I went first to the New South Wales College of Natural Therapies in Glebe and used their student clinic as a practice base. Then I moved to UTS. They had a sports physio room that I was able to rent. And then I had another day working in a medical practice in Leichhardt where I could use a spare room there. And then at the same time, I thought I wanted to work in the country. A patient of mine was a natural therapist who lived in Cowra, and she said, why don't you come up to Cowra and work there? So I thought, well, I think osteopathy should be in Cowra. So I went to Cowra to start a practice, and so I'd go up there every weekend for probably about a year and a half, 18 months. I'd go up every weekend. Sometimes it'd be every fortnight or every 3 weeks, but it would be a quick trip up in the morning, work all day, sometimes come back the same day or come back the next morning, and that was a great experience. The legacy for that is that one of the families that I was treating was had a son, Mark Kelly, who became an osteopath and was inspired by having osteopathic treatment. I hope it was my treatment, but at least he was liked it enough to think it would be a good profession. I remember his parents being very pleased that he'd gone into that direction. He now works with Natalie Rushdie up in Queensland, so that was a nice outcome from those days. Then I was invited to do a locum for Vanessa Malone in the city, so I did that for probably only 6 weeks or so, and then she and the other practitioners in that natural therapy office asked me to stay on because there was more osteopathy needed than they had days for Vanessa to do. And then I was invited to work up in Darlinghurst with a couple of doctors who, this is now the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, so we were kind of working in that area, and I was working with them who they'd established a very prominent clinic where they were supporting patients with HIV, so it was a very interesting area to work at the time. And then that closed up sadly with one of them dying, not due to HIV but but to another circumstance. And I started to work in Paddington with a doctor, Dr. Riedelman, and he had a spare room, and so that's how that started. So I was already, for the first 3 to 4 years, really starting to develop my own list in the inner city of Sydney, just moving around, and people kept following me, and I kept finding a better situation to work in. And then the clinic in the city, CBD, folded, and there was a couple of us, and I said, look, I'm going to take rooms down the road, and we got a good deal with a rental from the owners who, and that time there was a really big real estate sort of emptying out of the market. So landlords were desperate to get people in to take their rooms. So we got a very good deal for a few years. And that was the beginning of CBD Health Medical Centre that we started, and I started, and it continued for another 30 odd years. So that was very good practice. The business model, and I didn't have the opportunity to have a list of osteopaths who were able to come and grow the practice from an osteopathic point of view. So I took a different direction, and we went into a multidisciplinary mode of working, and we're very fortunate to get experienced practitioners who just really wanted to share the operating costs. And so that model was a very successful business model of the day, and we didn't rely on a supply of new osteopaths coming out of school, because they just weren't there. We didn't supply of students graduating from a big university course. So that was kind of the days of the beginning of osteopathy for me. And
Yeah.
Why
Go ahead.
City? I just love the patients. City patients have to be the best from my point of view. They come from every postcode in Sydney, and the beginning of working in the city was just the most popular patient treatment times were the early ones in the day before 9 o'clock, the last ones in the afternoon after 5 o'clock, and lunchtime appointments. And then you had this void in the middle of the morning or the middle of the afternoon where you could do something else. So in those times, I went to my other practice. So I was actually running 2 practices at once. So I go between the 2, sometimes half day about, sometimes just for 3 or 4 hours, and treat a block of patients and then come back again. So that's how that dual practice arrangement happened. So for the next...
You'd be carrying around a paper book as well as an appointment book, right?
Oh, our diaries, you mean?
Yeah, the diaries.
Yeah.
You're carrying your diaries around with a pencil.
There's nothing electronic. It was a receipt book that you had to have printed off with your registration number, and you'd basically, write their receipt and keep the indelible papers, for your bookkeeper later, and that's it. And I think it would have been a couple of years into it when the first computers and the computer programs started to become available, and then we were still running desk diaries, which were literally paper diaries. And sometimes
did you ever own any of those machines, Robert, where you had to, you put the card in and you click it and you
the old
boards? Remember those ones? They used to put the Medicare card in, or even the health funds used to have them. You used to kind of click it over and then you send that into the health fund.
Exactly right. And then you'd have to keep all those indelible receipts in case you're going to be audited by the
half the time you needed all that office space just to keep all your receipts.
And fill the paper boxes, so we kept in some sort of order. So that's how those practices were working. It was very simple, very low tech, but it worked. And I think the thing that happened is that you spent a lot of time, getting to know your patients, your patient base. They really loved coming to see us, and we created a great atmosphere for them. And it was a very, I guess, a holistic healing environment that was created in all these offices. So that was the sort of the state of play in the day.
I want to ask you about, obviously, the association and regulation, and I guess the profession starting to get itself organised and together. But before I do that, I hear there's an interesting story about the Chiropractors and Osteopathy Act and how osteopathy got in at the 11th hour. I remember somebody telling it to me a very, very long time ago, but I for the life of me, I can't remember it. Can you shed some light on that event and what actually happened, and how osteopaths were able to actually get themselves into that act and not have it taken over by chiropractors?
Um, so, rumor has it that
As all good stories start, rumour
as
has
the
it.
good stories continue, I suppose. Um, so, my understanding is that on the 11th hour, everyone in the manipulating business knew that the Act was being before Parliament, and Laurie Brereton in the Labor Party was friends with the chiropractors of the day who had strong Labor Party connections, and that was really well being supported through Parliament. And the 11th hour, the opposition stood up and said, what about the osteopaths? And that came because an osteopath had heard about it and was it was one of these quick huddles across a lunch break. Someone said, well, what are we going to do about it? And someone said, well, I know the local politician, I think it was Rosemary Foote, and they were able to get through to her and say, well, look, you know, the osteopaths have got a long history of treating people, and we have every right to be in that act as well. And so she did a little bit of research very quickly and was given some information, and she stood up in Parliament in the 11th hour and said, what about the osteopaths? And suddenly the Act had to stand down for a little while they reorganised themselves, and very hurriedly they had to add osteopathy into that Act. So that was the 1978 Act, and the first New South Wales Act for protecting manipulation. And behind that came was a workup from the Webb report, and Webb was a professor of, I think he was a professor of medicine in Queensland University. I stand to be corrected where he was working, but definitely a Queensland researcher, and he was commissioned by government to do a Webb report into natural therapies and manipulation, chiropractic, and I dare say osteopathy and so forth. So that's where that act got a lot of traction. And then move forward, the next few years was grandfathering osteopaths into that. So again, I mentioned Ivan and Brian and a number of others who went by the osteopathic title. So they were basically got registration by able to prove that they were working as osteopaths for a number of years, and so grandfathered in. Others
Clarify that for us a little bit, please, Robert. The Act itself specified that only osteopaths and chiropractors could manipulate the spine. That was basically...
Yeah, they were the only
it was
licensed.
the entire spine, not just the cervicals. It was the
The whole
entire spinal
spine, I
column.
understand it, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And that's since changed now, hasn't it? I mean, that's not the case today. I think
no.
they've
So
added other...
So the acts changed radically over the years. These are all the health acts and medical acts. It changed from a descriptive act, if you like, to a titles protection act. So the act that you're registered and I'm registered under now, under the APRA Act and the OBA, the Osteopathic Board of Australia, is a Titles Protection Act. So no one can call themselves an osteopath unless they are. And osteopathy is defined by the scope of practice and capabilities document that's been evolved and worked up regularly. And to be eligible to sit for those exams, you either graduate from an accredited program, or you come from an overseas recognised program directly, or you sit an examination process from overseas if they don't recognise that background. So they're the main avenues into being a registered practitioner in Australia.
But in terms of privileges, and treatment privileges, initially it was only osteopaths and chiropractors that could manipulate the spine. That's now, with all the, obviously what you just described, that's all changed now. There's no...
I think the only exception to that would be physiotherapists, because they came under their own act, so they were allowed to manipulate, but they were able to manipulate if they had the suitable qualifications acceptable to the physio board of the day. So they weren't policed by the chiropractic profession. So the name titles came together as well.
Has anything changed with regards to cervical manipulations, or that it's just now just one whole thing?
It's one whole thing. It's manipulation of the spine was the main area that they concentrated on, but it was just regarded as a manipulations act, generally speaking.
Right.
So,
Right.
and cervical spine was the area that was of most vulnerability, I guess. So they always emphasised, cervicals as being a problem area, if you like, or a high risk area.
Right. So technically now, can any practitioner that's non-regulated do spinal manipulation? Technically
No.
speaking.
No, you can, if someone was manipulating, and I stand to be corrected, because I think you'd have to prove that they're manipulating, and you'd have to prove that they're saying it's osteopathic manipulation or chiropractic manipulation. So there is a grey area there, if you like. And the only people permitted would be physiotherapists, medical doctors getting an exemption from all acts, and chiropractors and osteopaths. But all acts, it's a bit like TCM and dry needling and needling. A lot of people can do some needling, but they can't call themselves an acupuncturist.
Yeah, understandable.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into, I guess, your experience with regulation. Tell us about how you started off with, I guess, the registration board, and then your positions after that. And I guess I'll ask you some questions as we go along about, say, the role of the regulator and how that's changed over the years. But tell us how you got into it, Robert.
So I started out, and look, I think one of the things that happened for me, and I think it was encouraged by the teachers as well. We saw how hard they were working teaching osteopathy, and then I think we came out thinking, well, they're doing a good job and they're continuing to do a good job, and that's evolving. And the other areas that were badly neglected, I suppose, and in need of more support were areas of the profession and areas of the roles in the profession. So accreditation, registration, and governance was one area that we needed to be our own bosses. We needed to be our drive our own destiny, and so the professional body was small. The UOPG, United Osteopathic Physicians Guild, was started by Ivan and Brian, ostensibly, and some of the practitioners of the day in the late 70s, early 80s. So we came out of ICO, for instance, and we would want to be a member of that association to support them in numbers more than anything else. We didn't know what they really did. We were kind of young, naive, wannabe practitioners who were getting out there trying to earn a living. Basically, that was our goal. But we thought there was a responsibility, a duty of care to sort of put us back into the profession. So once we, our generation had enough, I guess, work under our belt to feel that we could, do something in the evenings and start to get together as a group and formalize that, we started to take roles in the professional body. The UOPG would meet in someone's home. Usually it would be once every couple of months. Sometimes we'd put an evening together of some, coffee, drinks, whatever, to make a bit of a thing about it. Sometimes we'd try and get all the professional members in that city area together and find someone who wanted to present a talk or an idea about treatment. So we had some sort of postgraduate workshops going. So that was the beginning of getting together regularly. And then I got involved with the local group, which was the New South Wales branch of UOPG. And UOPG included membership from Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia, although they were wanting to be affiliated, because the Western Australians like to have their own name, and they had their own variety of an association because of their distance. And Victoria didn't want to be included because they felt that they had their own organisation called the AOA Victoria, and that had been going as long as the UOPG, and they had enough work doing what they were doing down in Victoria. So the two larger bodies were basically UOPG and the Victorian AOA. And because we're osteopaths and because we wanted the same outcomes, we started to talk. And I remember Kevin Sturgis coming up to Sydney, and David Moore was involved in the UOPG, and Louise Adam was a heavy lifter in the profession of the day. She was probably one of the main people who, with David Moore, got those early conversations together. And then in Queensland, you had a number of practitioners who were coming down. Mark Keyworth moved to Queensland, and he was involved in the early days of the Queensland group talking. So, and if there was a conflict going down with one of the boards, say for instance in Queensland, then those resources from the UOPG would be directed up there. So Queensland, for instance, had a lot of difficulty because the chiropractors were very entrenched, because Joe Bielke-Peterson, the long-serving Premier of Queensland, his principal practitioner was a chiropractor. So basically the chiropractic profession was very well supported in government because of those kind of connections. And it was really basically a change in government leadership before there could be a change in boards up there. And I know that a number of the UOPG people went up to help the Queenslanders at the time. So that was it's a working groups everywhere doing little jobs like this, trying to help out the others. And in some cases, it was organising some extra cash. They'd do some workshops up there to raise some funds for whatever needed to happen next. And sometimes that was to pay for lawyers to represent the profession before ministers and so forth. So that kind of activity was happening everywhere, just small fires everywhere, trying to keep the osteopathic flame alive.
Yeah, okay.
So that was the environment. That was the beginning.
Yeah.
And then next thing that happened was the New South Wales Chiropractors Act was being rewritten and was about to change to be the New South Wales Osteopaths and Chiropractics Act. And the member... So that board, just to give you an insight, was a 9-member board, had one osteopath on it. The rest were chiropractic representatives. David Moore was osteopath. They had a number of committees. I got involved in the boards because I got into the education committee and ultimately the joint education committee, which was sort of the beginning of what became an accreditation body. So that's how we sort of got involved in it. That's how I got involved in it. And when David Moore stepped down, I was nominated to take his role. By that time, there was a merger going on between the UOPG and the AOA of Victoria, which became the AOA Australia, I suppose, as you know it now as OA. And the beginning of my role in that was I took over from Louise Adam, who is the first or the inaugural president of the organisation. We essentially headquartered it up here because there were more members and there was more people to do some of the work at the time. And at the same time, Victoria had just launched a course which was PIT, Philip Institute of Technology, which was beginnings of what became RMIT, osteopathy, and they had chiropractic and osteopathy in Victoria in the day. So they were very busy getting those courses and supporting that. So we got on with, establishing the profession and bedding it down. I became the president of the AOA in state president in 92, then 94, I was the president. And at that time, we were just organised enough to need an executive officer. Jan Carraher was the first executive officer. Steve Robbins replaced Jan Carraher. And then we'd set up an office. In the beginnings, it was an office out of Steve's home, I think, and then he financed the first purchase. Oh, well, no, he didn't finance. The profession rented an office, I think, up in Thornley, and then through his fiscal management, we were able to finance a deposit to buy the premises, which is at Chatswood. So that's how that started in the day. So
was that Chatswood office financed? From what I understand, that was. I think Ivan had a lot to do with donating a lot of resources for that particular office. Am I incorrect in that, or is that?
I think the profession funded the office,
right?
Through membership fees,
okay.
And there was a lot of gifting from different individuals, and lots of financially and in kind. Like a lot of books were donated and stuff like that, resources. And when Ivan was able to help financially was when the premises at Barker Street were sold. So that was a huge sale because of the beginning of the UWS program. So some of the profits from that building were gifted to the profession through from Ivan through a gift. But the office had been established before that and set up just before that.
Okay, and I guess it's a bit of a transition going from having a home office in Stephen Robbins' home to a I guess a proper office setting. Tell us about those years when Stephen took over, and it was such a rapidly moving time. How did the association evolve in those years?
We were just basically all working full time in our own practices. That's the only way we could fund ourselves. So there was no grants, no fees. Any fees that were paid as membership fees to the association went to the association for association only activities, and most of that was political lobbying and trying to get some marketing going and trying to do all the beginnings. A lot of courses were being taught, managed by the association or through the association today. We were trying to bring out a lot of presenters from overseas, so a lot of the resources went into that. And basically putting the profession on business footing was where that was going. So the people on the committees, the board of the AOA as it's become today, were basically practitioners after hours or during lunch hours. We would meet on telephone meetings. We would use the facsimile to get our information. Very few of us would use computers in the very beginning, so it was all paper, lifted documents that were used for meetings and so forth. And basically everyone was doing another job. So we're all full-time practitioners and we had another job. I was basically running between practices, and in my lunch hour I would meet up with, in my case it was Jan and Steve of the day, to go through different things. Sometimes they'd come to my office and get some papers signed or get some extra work done, and then I'd go to their offices or the office if it had to be. But basically we worked the telephones, we worked the facsimile, and we basically spent a lot of after hours time and meetings and trying to sort of get things organized. And it was done from the smell of an oil rag and the love of it. We just wanted to see osteopathy survive. We just wanted to see a larger footprint. We wanted to keep the flame alive. And so whereas Ivan and Peter and the teachers were teaching osteopathy, they had no time to do the extra work. So when they did get the extra work done, it was just at last straw stuff, and I think we saw the value in being able to do the next new thing, which is get the professional body working, get the governance starting to happen, and getting ourselves organised in that way. So for me, I was just in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place at the wrong time, and you just get that next seat and next seat and next seat, and suddenly you've got a couple of years of experience. I had a rule of thumb that no one should sit in a chair for very long, because you don't want to be that person that stayed too long, stayed your welcome. And so just as I was thinking of jumping out of it, something else would happen, and another movement would happen, and then you'd be asked if you could stay on for this new role or the new legislation coming down.
Well, I think that's quite wise. I mean, how long was Stephen there for at the helm of the then AOA? I think it was there for about 7 years, from memory.
Steve Robbins?
Yes.
Oh, Steve Robbins. He was close to 10 years.
10 years, right.
And I talked to Steve the other day, and he was he went from osteopathy to the dental profession, and was one of the executive officers for dental. I think it was dental specialists body.
And what ultimately led to Stephen moving on? Like, what was was it just the profession needed another a change in direction, or did he want to change in direction? What was the feeling at the time?
Like a lot of these things, I think it was basically time for change. I think Steve, when I spoke to him, he said, "Look, I thought it was time for me to move before it happened. The way in which it happened, I think could have been done better. And there wasn't any horrible thing happen or anything like that. I just the way in which these things change sometimes could be done better if we knew what we knew now." So I think he was a little bit upset, but to his credit, he helped and still and pass on a lot of the corporate information to Anthony, who has been in the job since. So for the be coming up, what would that be, 20 years or so?
It's a long time. I think it's I think it's healthy to have obviously the board members have terms. They've got terms that they need to go by.
So board terms 3 years, and then I'm not sure what osteopathy is, but it wouldn't be any more than 3 years, and then the re-election process and the turnover. So you keep the boards fresh. That's very important.
Yes.
I guess the concern for bodies like osteopathy, where you have someone who does stay a long while because they're doing a good job and they know the history and they're doing they're helping to hold things together, is that you want to have a succession plan so you don't lose all that corporate knowledge when you do move on, and that's
I think a succession plan is important. It's definitely important.
And I think when you go into a meeting with Anthony these days, the corporate knowledge, he's just a very competent professional who knows the area because he's been working a long time, and so that's the benefit of having someone with that legacy who has that corporate knowledge. The worry is who's going to replace Anthony, and how will that be done. And I'm sure that the board, I understand that they've got a succession plan, and I'm sure that will happen at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I think also we have to look at we're a small profession, and I guess we can be heavily affected with even small movements or even medium-sized movements in the profession because we are so small. So one of the things that I was chatting to somebody about on an episode a little while ago was that there's obviously a greater influx now of graduates that are coming out. I think there's something like between 200 and 300 graduates, coming out each year. And so when you look at that, within about 3 or 4 years, you're going to have At the moment, we're probably sitting around between 3 and 4,000 osteopaths in the country.
We've got
And
3,600 at the moment. And there's
3,600,
1,200
yeah.
students in study at the moment.
Sorry, say that again. How many
1,200
students?
students in study at the
1,200
moment.
students studying. And so, like, we would expect that, we'd probably graduate 200 to 300 out of those each year. And so, in about 5 years, you're going to have a third of the profession that we have now kind of coming onto the back end of the membership or potential membership. So the membership is going to get younger and younger within the association.
Or we're going to get older and older.
Well, it's not a bad thing that the membership becomes younger, but ultimately, I think you want wise heads steering the ship. You don't want a membership that's electing board members that are only 1 or 2 years out into practice or out into the field. These days, it's not just private practice anymore. It's it's aged care, it's occupational health and safety. Some people are doing workers' compensation work, NDIS, and so osteopathy is kind of changing and growing. But I think it's healthy that we make sure that we have a representation on the board and in the executive that is at least somewhat experienced and not fresh, or too fresh in that they're I guess they haven't what's the word I'm looking for, cut themselves in the profession. What are your thoughts on that, Robert? Do you think it's healthy to make sure that the steering wheel in your day were, you had some pretty wise hands on that steering wheel when you were a student, and then probably a little bit into your early career, and it wasn't probably until a good 5 to 10 years into your career that you began to get into regulation and association.
Yeah, good observation, good question as well. I guess there's a number of ways of tackling that, and they're all right. There's nothing wrong. Yes, it's lovely.
And no disrespect to
the younger,
no. Yeah.
I'm not taking it or hearing it. Essentially, I think there's a calling to these sorts of roles. For me, it came out of being put down by another profession not letting me work. So I was pretty cut up about that. And when they wanted to make me a chiropractor, and there's that was just too much, and that was something that I wasn't going to tolerate. And so when I had an opportunity to put back in the profession, I grabbed the opportunity. And I'm not naturally a comfortable teacher. I don't feel comfortable when I'm standing up in front of a big group teaching, but I felt comfortable in board meetings. I felt comfortable to do that behind the scenes work, and so I was called that. So here I am, 4 or 5 years out. I'm sort of the New South Wales president of the UOPG, and then the branch member of AOA, and I'm not even 26 or 20. I am 25, 26 in the time, around that sort of age. I know nothing, and so I'm learning from my more experienced practitioners who are 32, 33, and they've got 5 years or 7 years practice up their sleeve. And we're all putting our analysis together to figure out how to do this. And everything we're doing for the first time. And we don't have the experience of corporate knowledge along holding our hands or anything like that. So we're really struggling. So it's sometimes the passion that drives it. Sometimes it's the fact that you've got the time to do it, and sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time. I don't know. So sometimes it's a number of those sorts of things. So, but now that we've got a larger profession, a larger number of practitioners, I think we can be a bit more strategic. So you're right about that. You're nailing it, hitting the nail on the head with that one. And I think that's when we have a wealth of knowledge out there, and perhaps the other resource we could start to look at is what happens when some of those practitioners start to step away from having to survive in clinical practice, if it has been their mainstay, and they've got a bit of time to give back, put back into the profession. One of the lovely things for me as a new member on those bodies was that Ivan kept coming back into it. He thought he could get away a couple of different times. He moved out of Sydney, he moved down to Canberra. Next thing
Yeah.
he pops up as the ACT registration representative for osteopathy down there. So he didn't get away very far before he's back in the meetings with us. And he's a huge resource at different times, and very helpful, and so that was beneficial. But when we the OBA set up, we were very lucky to have Phil Tian, Victoria, come onto the board, and he brought with him not only a wealth of educational knowledge. He was the educational representative, but he was also had that legacy that you can only have from being around the profession for 20 years or 30 years or more, as the case was in his case. And he had the experience of setting up, working in PIT, seeing it merge to become RMIT, and then seeing the vulnerability of it being in with a chiropractic program at the time, in that very beginning of RMIT, and the real threat that it might be, it might collapse into chiropractic as things happened in New South Wales. And they had the foresight to see the opportunity to start VU, Victoria University of Technology in the day it was, and then it became VU University. And so those sorts of foresights come with, as you say, that maturity, if you like, and the profession is maturing, and that's what we need to, pat ourselves on the back for every so often, and actually recognise the work that's gone on, and then realise there's a lot of work to go, and you've raised some very important issues there. What's going to happen with all these different strains? So, those students coming out of the universities now, they're coming out with a fantastic education, but a more generic education than we ever came out with in terms of health sciences. And it's just fantastic that they've got so many more opportunities than I had in my day. And I know that you had a lot more opportunities in your day, and they've got more opportunities than both of us had in the time that we graduated. I think, would I be right? You're about 20 years out now?
Yeah, I graduated in 2003, so going about 22 years.
22.
Yeah, so over 20 years. But
Congratulations.
thank you. You mentioned something that there's more opportunity today. Yet we keep hearing, or I keep hearing, that there's, we have a problem with attrition. We have a problem keeping people in the profession, and that people are finding it, younger graduates, early graduates are finding it hard to keep positions and I guess make decent money in the profession, and they're going elsewhere because the income is easier. Do you have any thoughts on that? And what do you think that might?
Yeah.
What might that be because?
So,
To put this into context, Robert, sorry to cut you off. Just to put it in a bit of context, I feel like that the time that I was going through university and just after I graduated felt like a really big boom time in osteopathy, especially in New South Wales. It just felt like we were coming into a market that was ripe for us. It had been really well prepared by people like yourself and the graduates of the ICO that really had. I'd gone and I'd seen Ann Cooper work and Paul Harradence and John Abdullah and Thomas Samuels at the time as well. A few other people, and they were so busy. They were very, very busy practitioners, and they were screaming out for people to come and work with them. And we didn't find it very hard to find work. It was an easy thing. It was just an easy transition. It wasn't difficult at all. And I felt like that time in osteopathy has been a boom time, because I think there was a university program that was starting to graduate really good graduates, and a lot of really good, competent osteopaths had kind of set these practices up and done some great work in the communities, and the communities were just ready for us to go in there and just, have our patient numbers exploded. There's a lot more saturation at the moment, especially out of Melbourne. The market there is, there's an osteopath in every suburb in Melbourne now, which is amazing. It's great. But that means that there's more competition for, I guess, good osteopaths. The employee model over there has really taken off. I think there are a lot of clinics that use that model, and so osteopaths are now coming out as employees, not as contractors, where they are guaranteed an income, and it's become now quite a normal thing to expect a certain salary when you graduate. And I guess if that salary is not there, they're looking elsewhere for other income. So just putting that into context, can you comment on why you think that there might be a problem at the moment with attrition and with keeping our graduates in osteopathy?
Okay, I'm a little bit out of the data in terms of I haven't been involved in it for now. It's almost 10 years since I was in the boards and seeing that kind of data come across the desk regularly. I hear the anecdotal stories, the sort of statements you've just made, and I think there's probably no doubt that that's happening. I can just envisage those sorts of things happening, but perhaps the context might be necessary to look at each of those issues, and I'm not going to go through them all one by one or anything, but just broadly speaking, look at the number of graduates that are coming out of some of the courses. How many graduated in your year, for instance, back 20 years ago?
About 15.
And then and the successive years. I think there are.
Oh, look, that would have increased. I think that would have increased somewhat to close to
some of
between
intakes.
30 and 40, and maybe 50 graduates by the time that course shut down in, I think, 2010.
Yeah,
from memory.
exactly. And so that's huge numbers. And when you've got huge numbers, you're not going to have them all feeding into private practice as it may have been in my day. So in my day, and perhaps in your day, so 20 and 40 years, we've got situations like the only way I could make money is to be a practitioner. I couldn't go into any health job because I wasn't trained for that. Those jobs weren't wanting the kind of qualifications I had. I had a diploma. I came from a diploma background. You were taught by a lot of teachers who came from that diploma background, and they'd gone on to get degrees in many cases and some PhDs, which is university currency for lecturing. And so we came out of a different educational model of the day, but students are going into a different educational model of the day as well. They're not going into a TAFE training. They're going into a university education, and by rights, a university education has to teach them for a lot of other broader skills, because my kids are in their early 20s, and they were told at high school, so just recently, that they're going to have 6 different careers that they might have to move through during their working lifetime of, say, some 40 or 50 years ahead of them. And so they need to prepare themselves for those undergraduate qualifications to be able to make changes in the workplace as it changes. My daughter's up in London at the moment, my oldest daughter, and she's being chased with AI behind her marketing qualification. Works for a big multinational out of America, and she knows in a few years that her job, she's training up AI to do her job that she's doing today. So she knows that her job's going to evolve into something else. And I dare say that the students that are entering into university are looking at what options will these programs give us if I can't do osteopathy, if that's the one thing they thought they'd go in for. Now, how did they get into the course? Well, maybe they should have done a broad science degree and then chosen osteopathy in the program as an elective. I don't know. That's a course design. Maybe they should have been interviewed, as it was in the day for us, to see whether we were going to make good students for the osteopathic profession to work at the table. But that's not how university education works anymore. And the funding that the government provides for different vocations is based on being able to make those skills portable into different areas of the workforce. Now, if we also think the students today are not that different to the students of my day. You go to university and you do your first course. Basically, a majority of kids are doing a lot of broad-ranging courses. And a university friend of mine he's a vice chancellor at one of the big universities says, look, undergraduate degrees, you're a young person, you come to university to grow up. And it's basically the old rule of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and you might learn something by the time you graduate after 3 years. So you've got these, 21, 22-year-olds who aren't sure what they're going to be doing that first degree. And, I look at my daughter middle daughter who went to university after a year or two off, and she was majoring in French and Spanish. And then by the time she came out, she was following a whole bunch of medicos around the ski field, and she suddenly decided she wanted to do emergency medicine. So now she started off studying for GAMSAT. So that's the kind of, she didn't know what she wanted to do for 3 or 4 years. She went into an arts direction, and she comes out thinking that she wants to do something in healthcare. So it's completely unique and individual to the person. So it makes sense to me that a number of the graduates, when you get into larger volumes, aren't going to want to go and work at the table, and they may not have had enough lecturing exposure to think that that's something that they're going to be good at or want to be good at when they graduate. So you've got to look at the individual very much and then look at the course design. I kind of like the European model. The French osteopaths that I've met over the years, I'm very lucky to get to know Jean-Pierre Borel, spend some time in his practice and spend some time with him over the years. And their way of learning was to do a basic science and health sciences, we would call it. And then they would work out what they want to do to go into physical therapy. He went into physical therapy and then changed to osteopathy. So you get a whole different way of learning, and that's going back 40 years. That's what they were doing then. And we've got into universities. Now we've got to start looking at how we want universities to teach our professional skills. Maybe, and I don't support this, but maybe we should have a postgraduate qualification where people do osteopathy as a postgraduate degree. I'm not sure that is very good when I've seen them around, but that's just another model that people kick around. The chiropractors in Macquarie have been trying to do that, and I'm not sure what the outcomes are, good or bad. What are we? Who are we attracting, and what sort of people do we want to attract into the profession? Might be some of the questions that go into answering your question of why are people going into other areas once they graduate?
Well, I don't think there's a problem that people go into other areas. That's not the problem. I think the problem is that people that want to go into private practice are finding it difficult to earn a good income, and part of that is because they are probably lacking the skills that are needed to, I guess, kickstart that career. And so we need to look at why is it that we're not equipping them with that skill set. And there's a lot of pressure on universities. I've talked to now the heads of the two Victorian universities, and they made some great points as to some of the pressures that are on universities to kind of bring in more generic evidence-based type of medicine to the osteopathy courses, and not there's anything wrong with that, but I guess what makes us unique is as osteopaths is osteopathy, and if we stop teaching osteopathy, then we might as well just do a health science degree. I also had another conversation with, I think it was Cliff Butler a little while ago, and we were talking about the internship model. And I think that's a very good model to explore, to give people a little bit more exposure to different private practices and equip them, I think, with the necessary skill set. I mean, you recall that when you were studying, just next door was Ivan and Peter Cash and Robert Goodsall's practice, and you would obviously spend time there as students doing the work that would later prove to be probably critical to your early career success. And so I think the internship model has some merits. I know that they had that at RMIT, and they're probably working on getting that back there. But it's an interesting place to kind of look at, and I think we need to focus in on that as a profession, because we can say what you just said about how different people we need to speak to them and find out if that's what they want to go into. But ultimately, I think we need to be able to equip people for private practice or practice at a table, whether you do that in a hospital, at an aged care facility, in a private practice. You need to be able to, I guess, treat from an osteopathic standpoint, and anything we can do to make the graduates better, I am all for. So it was good to get your input on that, because you've seen it from a regulatory and an association point of view in terms of what the association does to try and, I guess, influence either tertiary education or maybe what is going on in the profession. What is available to an association, Robert? Like, say you're looking at a course and you're seeing a trend. You got the numbers in front of you, and you see a trend coming out with some of the graduates, and you look at it as an osteopath yourself, and say a board member, and also you've got other board members, and you're all looking at it and go, this trend is really going to bite us in the backside in 5 years if we don't address it now. What power do you have as an association to either speak to the education institutions or to the educators themselves, or, I don't know, something else that may change the direction of something that's happening in the course that you're not happy about, or in the profession that you're not happy about?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot in that. So just unpick a few things, and hopefully I won't forget all of them. So what we didn't have in my day was we didn't have the professional groups to work with. So we didn't have boards that were our own. We didn't have accrediting bodies that could do that work that are our own. And the association was just a bunch of practitioners with one or two paid people that were trying to kick us into shape. So that's what we had then. Roll the time through, and lots happened, and getting a course into New South Wales UWS was huge, and that was a huge heavy lifting thing. Unfortunately, we couldn't keep that going because of the changes there. So we've had a void of graduates coming into the marketplace, whereas Victoria's been able to keep the graduates coming through. Most graduates will stay close to home. So whatever percentage go into the profession and come out wanting to practice the profession they went into are going to stay close to home. So why would you go north of the Murray River if you can run a good business in Melbourne and every second block knows what an osteopath is? Why would you, go further than you need to? And then you can work out how many thousands of people it keeps you need to run a practice. How many bad backs do you need for a practitioner to be regularly employed? And then the more practitioners you have in an area, the more people know about that profession, because they chat to themselves. We've all got the connections with social media these days, advertising. We had the phone book. We thought the phone book was great. And you could do a lot of things with the phone book.
So let your fingers do the walking.
Yeah. But basically, you had a situation where local practitioners really generated local knowledge of what was available to treat patients, and sometimes you'd hear these stories about osteopaths setting up next to a busy chiropractor and developing a very prosperous business just by the people that were dissatisfied with the colleague down the road. It took all sorts of situations and great anecdotal stories into the future. I think we do need more graduates for the Sydney Basin. It's a big population that's not being serviced well, so that goes without saying. So don't get me wrong. There is a problem there. We've got a shortage of supply. We've got a major supply problem, and I don't know how we're going to address that, because we've been searching for it forever and a day. Then we've got the age-old problem. How do you promote osteopathy? What's the best way to promote osteopathy? I don't know. Sometimes good news, bad news, stories make a lot of difference. A famous sportsman who's seeing an osteopath who wins a tennis competition or something like that. England, they had the Profumo affair. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but I was watching The Crown some years ago, that famous TV series about the royal family, and a whole segment was done on the Profumo affair.
Yeah.
And Stephen Ward infamously brought a lot of attention to osteopathy for all the wrong reasons. But people knew what osteopathy was as a result.
That's right.
I don't know if we need to do that. I don't think it's a good idea. But
They sounded like fun parties, though, didn't they?
quite interesting. Anyway, so that marketing idea. What's the best way to market osteopathy? I think that the graduates that go into practice and get a good learning start, doing good results with their patients, speak more for the profession than anything else. I think when we're relying on the association to promote the profession, we're in trouble. Our own good works, our own word spreads by the work we do and the outcomes we get. Yes, can the profession do a bit more to help that? More awareness is always useful. But every practitioner will say, oh, I don't like that flavour. That's not really me as a practitioner. And then someone else will say, oh, well, it hit the nail on the head for me. But someone else will say, oh,
yeah, I agree with you there. I think the swell needs to come from the ground up.
Yeah. So more people out there practicing osteopathy, so more education. But when things aren't being taught, because that goes to your question, you're if I heard you correctly, you're saying you're worried that the teaching that some of the students are getting isn't preparing them to go out into practice. And
yeah, so I'm a little bit concerned because I've seen some graduates and I have my own experience and I know that other people have maybe had better experience, which is fine. And I've talked, the thing about, like I always say with this podcast, is when you do a podcast like this, people think that you're an investigator on 60 Minutes and they message you privately and they call you up and they say, hey, I really, liked what you said about such and such. I've had this problem and I feel this way. And a lot of the feedback that I'm getting from people is that, they feel like that, and that it's not a attack on the graduates themselves, because they feel bad for graduates, for university students, because they feel like they should be getting more osteopathy than what they are. And when I say osteopathy, I'm talking about osteopathic rationale and how to actually put things together osteopathically, how to put a proper diagnosis together, how to actually treat osteopathically. Having good clinicians teach technique is another one that's been told to me, and so these things are I'm hearing, and I guess they probably need addressing. I did talk to Gary Fryer on the podcast, and Gary, to his credit, actually went and made some changes after that episode and saw that there were some things that were needed addressing, and he went and addressed them. And so, pat on the back to Gary, good guy, and great work there for doing that. So I just hope that we're not losing the uniqueness that we have because it's not being taught in tertiary education. And some of the responsibility falls back onto the student. Like you can't, osteopathy, can't be handed on a silver platter. You got to go and chase it. You got to go and look for it, and you got to go and actually read. And I'll go back to what you said earlier. Pull out those old journals and read the old texts and see what practitioners before you have been doing. It's kind of like tradition plays a big part in education, and talking to practitioners that have been there and done that really inspires you and makes you want to go and become and stay an osteopath. And so the worry is, and going back to my question, the worry is that students aren't getting some of that at in tertiary education. And as an association, how can we make change? How can we speak, like you've been there, Robert, when when UWS was kind of starting on, or you were there when VU and Southern Cross also was starting, but you were also there when RMIT was kind of up and going and on their way. If there was something there that you wanted to address with the university, what was the best? How can an association do that? Hello everyone, just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes, so for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy, and back to the show.
Well, I'm just listening to you, and you're providing the answer to your own questions, because you spoke to Gary Fryer and you said, look, I'm hearing this and seeing this, and is there a problem? And you're actually standing up and doing something about it. And I'm not trying to make your head get bigger, but you're actually, passionate about the subject, and you're actually taking a step forward. And that's actually the mechanism to answer the question. We need to get on the phone. We need to get into the conversations with the different bodies and be able to do that. Now, the good thing is that we've got bodies to talk to. We've got our own schools of osteopathy, I'm going to generically call them all that. And you do have people that the head of that program, and they have proper feedback channels for that. Now, you can talk directly to the head honcho, as you did with Gary Fryer, but you can also go constructively through the channels that all universities will have to provide industry feedback. And they all have different names for that. It's not very hard to get hold of the right channels to get that. And I would really encourage practitioners who have enough insight to have first-hand experience. And I think to another question that came within that question, that there's different qualities there. There's some practitioners who've got it right, and there's some practitioners who haven't got it yet. And there's some practitioners are figuring out whether they're going to get it or whether they should be looking somewhere else to get something else. And that comes down to the individual, and we need a channel for the individuals to be able to be supervised or mentored, or some kind of preceptorship type program that they can enroll in to help them across those struggle times. We all have them. I had them when I failed my my first Regio exams, and we had big bridging courses put together, and then we put groups together and got more experienced people to tutor us. When I was doing my postgrad masters coming up for the Viva, and I had Jane Carrero and Frank Willard as examiners, some of the examiners on those Vivas, and Americans, American practitioners, American lecturers. And I was using a colleague from work. I had a lot of general practitioners working in my practices, and one of them was very open-minded towards pediatrics in particular, but also had a lot of exposure to alternative allied healthcare, and she was brilliant at coaching and helping us get through those exams. So those sorts of things are happening all the time with our learning. I can't help but think I can only talk about my journey. My journey I came through, and I just didn't think I was getting enough information from the college, my teaching. I wanted more. I was hungry, and I went out and started massaging, and some of the teachers were osteopaths who taught me to massage, and it was soft tissue, we called it, but we used oil, and because that's what patients wanted. They weren't osteopathic patients, they were massage patients. They knew the big difference, and so I was able to do that for a lot of treatments. And when I qualified and became more experienced, I was starting to use osteopathic technique in those massages. They didn't know it, and I didn't call it that. I wasn't allowed to, didn't know to think about it. But it was hands-on work for me. It was hands-on mileage experience. And then when I finished, for me, I knew nothing. I was working by myself in one room, no other practitioners in the beginning. And I was, really worried that I was going to, fall by the wayside. And so I started to go and meet practitioners, experienced practitioners that I didn't have opportunities to meet in college days, and understand how they worked as osteopaths. I would interview them. I would take them out for dinner or lunch or something like that. I'd try and spend some observational time. And I'm a qualified practitioner going in to see a more experienced practitioner. And that's how I spent some of my pastime. So I kept doing that because that's what fueled my hunger or satisfied my hunger and my inquiry. And as soon as I could get some money together, I started traveling. So I started going overseas to do courses. First course was Upledger program. That's the only one we were allowed into. They wouldn't let us into the Cranial Academy lectures in the beginning because, well, we didn't know we could, and they didn't think we were real osteopaths of the day, I don't think. But then once we found out they let the British osteopaths in, and then some British osteopaths came down, Mansur Fravel, who became Maxwell Fravel. Everyone changes their name in this profession. Had enough contacts to start opening those doors up. So suddenly, 4 years into practice life, I'm at a table with John Upledger, and the man oozes osteopathy. There's a lot of people that are critical of him taking osteopathy in the cranial field out of the protection of osteopathy and making it more publicly available. And I think it did a disservice to the professional skills. But needless to say, that's what he had to do in the day to sort of satisfy his hunger for teaching, I suppose. And then through that, I spent time at the table with Anne Wales. Anne Wales was a student of Sutherland. She did the work groups with Sutherland at the Cranial Academy. I was lectured with a lot of other people. The guest lecturer was a guy called Brooks, can't remember the other part of his name. And this guy was, in his 90s, and he came in and he had one of those harmonica microphone holders, I remember, and he had a patient on the table in front of him, and he's talking over this, and he says, I get up in the morning, I haven't been licensed to practice osteopathy for the last 40 years or 30 years or something like that. But I get up in the morning and I walk out and the front door, and there's people on my veranda waiting for treatment. And then I put my hands on them, and it's almost like someone turned the power onto my house. I feel alive again, because he's starting to feel. That guy was the reputation, or the rumor is that he met A.T. Still. He actually, as a child, met A.T. Still, and he became an osteopath. So you got that hand-me-down legacy. And Jane Carrera spent hours and hours, days and days with Anne Whale because she was living in that main New England area up in New England University of Osteopathic Medicine. And Jane's the goddaughter to Annabelle, my daughter. And if you look at one of Jane's texts, you can see Annabelle as a little kid, 3-year-old in our kitchen, playing with pots and pans, and she's making some sort of... So she has dinner with Jane when Jane's in London. Annabelle gets treatment from Sue Turner, who was teaching us on our PEDS course. So you've got this legacy of osteopaths teaching osteopaths. Jane and Frank would come and stay at our place because, we couldn't afford the hotels for people to come and stay. So we put them up in our homes. They were part of the faculty teaching pediatrics. So we've got that rich history, and you've got a lot of practitioners who spent time overseas. And some of those early lectures, we just basically, they were our holidays. That's how we holidayed.
That's the tradition that I was talking about, and it's quite inspiring, and it's something that if students get a taste of it, you really then begin to understand the ones that want it and the ones that are maybe don't want it as much. And it's okay not wanting it as much. There's nothing wrong with that. You said something earlier about Upledger and the criticism that he received. from, I guess, removing cranial from the protection of osteopathy.
So,
Cranial is no longer, sorry to finish the question, cranial is no longer taught in the major universities here in Australia in the three courses. And I guess the main criticism for that is that it's lacking evidence, or the evidence base isn't great for it. How much are we doing a disservice to the profession by not having that that as part of, say, an osteopathy course in the Australian universities? Is that something, do you think, that's going to hurt the Australian profession, or is it something that's just going to keep going the way it is?
Yeah, this is a personal view.
Yes, of course.
Situation where I'm not speaking as a board member, I'm not speaking as a faculty member, or I don't
No, I've got you on here as Robert.
and you're not going to let anyone listen to this except you and I. So
Of
you're
course.
welcome now.
Yeah.
So I wasn't taught cranial in my undergraduate program either.
Right.
It was just being spoken about and just started to creep into the curriculum for the more mature teachers and experience. Some practitioners who are our teachers had learnt it and were practicing some cranial techniques in their practice, and they were hungry for the knowledge, they were hungry for the information. And a number of overseas presenters were being brought out. The Beckers, Alan Becker again came out, and he's a big cranial practitioner. And so you've got this situation where we didn't learn it as undergraduate, and there were a lot of questions around that. And basically it came down to hours of teaching. We just didn't have the time to teach the basics and teach this other stuff. So we had probably enough tuition to whet the appetite. Look, this is how you spell cranial. This is what you what is meant by cranial osteopathy, or osteopathy in the cranial field. And so I didn't really get into any proper teaching until probably 3 to 4 years out, when I started to go overseas and learn. The criticism for, just to touch on that comment about John Upledger, was that John Upledger commercialized the teaching of cranial osteopathy. His business partner was a son of one of the big Ford families, and he thought, oh yeah, I'll help you run a business, this is how we put it together. And they started to franchise this teaching of osteopathy in the cranial field, or cranial osteopathy as they coined it, and they marketed it, and they're brilliant at marketing, and then they got big courses, and those courses were being taught by non-osteopaths. So they worked out a way of teaching it. One of the people that they employed to give him some American exposure was Jean-Pierre Burrell. So I was grateful to meet Jean-Pierre through those connections, and that's how we became friends. I think the French liked the Australian way of thinking, so we got on better than the Americans like the Australian way of thinking, I think, although they do like us too. But when he found out I was a Kiwi, then that was that's when we really got on, given that he'd just blown up the Rainbow Wire in New Zealand, so that was kind of funny in the day. But and incidentally, let it be on record, the first one of the first presidents or chairs of APRA was a Kiwi, and also the Osteopathic Board. So I kind of think it's kind of funny in Australia, but anyway.
That is a bit ironic.
Joke. I won't go on about. But to the point, I think it's really important that students get a really good education in soft tissue and hands-on experience at that level. And one of the areas where it can all go wrong for a new student is learning to manipulate with high velocity forces. And that needs to be taught very carefully, very safely, and very effectively, because it will be your bread and butter for those first years out. For me, I like to think that you start off learning all the more forceful ways of treating a patient, because it's easy to teach, easy to learn, and with good practice you can master it fairly quickly. And then I think I'm spending the rest of my life becoming softer and softer and lighter. So for all intents and purposes, I don't call myself a cranial practitioner to market that, but I work as a practitioner who works in a voluntary way where I can, and I try to use the least amount of force on my patients. But then I learnt from the French osteopaths to never lie your patients down prone. So I always treat my patients supine. I never use oil from my first day of graduating as a practitioner in my practice. I talk to my patients constantly. I want their feedback while I'm treating them. I still do a standard flexion test when they walk in the door. A 10-step screening process when they walk in the door. I always go and meet my patients to walk in the door to see how they're moving. I look at the patients. I look for the strain patterns in their face. I look for the strain patterns in their body before I even start asking them. And when I do a body scan, sensing what's going on before I even lie them down or sit them down to do a screening process. So all of these subtle examination techniques are all happening before I put my hands on the patient from a treating point of view. And then I usually go to an area of the body where the patient isn't even complaining. So they've come in with a headache and neck problems, and I'm on their feet. I'm treating their feet. I'm feeling what their legs are telling me. I'm looking at what the pelvis is showing me from their feet. I'm just lightly touching their tibias to see where the rotation is, and the forces are pulling and drawing my attention. So that sensing is something.
But there's rationale behind that, right, Robert? It's not just a random thing that you're doing.
Absolutely.
It's not like
it's osteopathic rationale, and I'm critically thinking like an osteopath with those principles. What could be possibly going on? Wait a minute, this unit here of bodily functions and a strain pattern. What's that doing? Why isn't the circulation going there? What's the stasis over here? What's this inflammation here? Trying to understand that. And then the reciprocity between the structure and function relationship. How's that impacting? Why isn't their diaphragm moving? Why isn't their pelvic diaphragm and their diaphragmatic level and their thoracic inlet all working together? Why is there the strain distortion going through their body? And that's all happening in that early assessment, hands-on. And then patients will so often say, "Oh, how do you know it's hurting there?" How often do you hear that, Sami? How do you know it's hurting there? And it's like, yes, I could see it from my examination process. My diagnostics told me that from an osteopathic critical thinking point of view.
Yeah, some patients think that you're following around with the binoculars,
Yeah, exactly. You sort of.
So I'm not stalking you.
Then I'm sitting with a patient, my hands under their sacrum, and I'm sort of, my thenar eminence is across their coccyx sacroiliac joint, and sacrum's in my hand, and the L4-5 are in my fingers, and I can feel the SI joints and getting a balance through that. And they're saying, "What are you doing?" And I just say, "Keeping my hands warm," because you basically
it does keep your hands warm.
You're concentrating on something else, and they just say, well, it's working. It's really relaxing me. Something's changing. So those subtle things. I'm learning every day I see a patient. Today I go to work and I love seeing my patients. I love seeing my going to work, and I keep learning something new every day.
Based on what you just said to me now, Robert. What is an osteopath, Robert, to you, in your particular definition? What's an osteopath and what is osteopathy? Like, if you had to define it, because one of the criticisms that I guess all of us have about everybody is that we can't all sit in a room and agree about osteopathy. So I'm asking practitioners this question. What is it that you think osteopathy is? How would you define it?
you don't want to know that, what I've just said, which is, it's a unit of function, the body, and there's this relationship between structure and function and the rule of the artery. You don't want to hear that, right? You know that. That's what all
Well,
of
I know that,
read.
but I'm asking the question. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I think the listeners want to know what you think. I think that osteopathy is just the fourth principle that says that rational treatment is based on the first three principles. That's osteopathy to me. I think anything outside of that, you're beginning to add things to it, and you're beginning to, I guess,
What
start a
does that
different
mean?
conversation.
What does that actually mean to you, though, as a practitioner? Because that's what we're discussing here, and I'm just trying to understand where you want the question to be answered. Because I can,
Well, I mean, what is osteopathy? So, is osteopathy is it a set of techniques? Does it have to be hands-on, or is it an idea? Is osteopathy an idea? Is osteopathy a philosophy that then gets put into practice? Um, and if it is an idea, what's the idea? What is actually? Is it based on the principles? Is it based on the body is a unit of body, mind, and spirit. Structure and function are reciprocally related, and the body has a self-regulatory and homeostatic mechanism. And that osteopathic treatment is based on the first three principles, the rationale of those three principles. I mean, that's what I was taught, and I've applied those into every treatment that I do, and that's really been what sustained my personal practice. And made it grow and help me help a lot of people. And that's what defines osteopathy for me. And I think anything that we add to that isn't necessarily not osteopathic, but it's something that I guess is extra. Is you're now starting to add to it. So I like to keep things, I guess. As traditional as I receive them. I don't like to muck around too much with things without a lot of thought,
Hmm. Um, and so
So then my question to you is, what do you think about that? Like,
yeah. Well,
would you define osteopathy in a similar way, or do you have any other opinions on it?
no, that's the way I define osteopathy, because that's the easy way to say it to people, particularly other osteopaths and patients who need to understand. And you explain what the structure is, and you explain how the functions work and the relation between them. And then you talk about the circulation and the way in which the body survives because of its nutrients and drainage and so forth. And then you talk about it functioning as a unit and understanding how that works. And there's no doubt about that. But when you talk about how you apply that, because they're just the principles, and osteopathy is the application of those principles.
Correct.
Getting outcomes. And I think that if we look at the definitions of the way people think about evidence and evidence-based medicine, we don't know how osteopathy works. And we have a lot of experience about knowing how osteopathy works, but we don't actually know how it actually happens. And this
so we know we know about physiology, we know about anatomy, we know about mechanics and the laws of the universe and how they govern mechanical principles. And so, I mean, the body isn't any different. We exist in this particular universe with different laws that govern our existence and govern our movement.
Sorry if
and
I jump in there and say, but you've just told me that you have a traditional view and practice of the principles of osteopathy, and then you go and see your patients, and then you do a whole bunch of things to them along the guidelines of the techniques that you were taught to apply the principles and think the way you learn to think from those principles and the experience. But you're only as good as the experience of what you're doing with the patients you've just treated. So you're looking at the subjective and objective outcomes from that treatment that you've just executed. And so that's your experience at that moment in time. And so your experience is your knowing that it works. But
Yeah, my
you have
experience,
to
obviously
prove
there's,
in some
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
materialistic way and some scientific way of how that actually works. By putting your hands there and releasing this area here, it actually is going to fix that problem for that patient. There is no science out there at the moment that can explain that. And the anesthesiologists, anesthetics, they don't know how it works. They know it works,
Yeah,
but they don't
yeah.
know how it works.
Yeah, I don't claim to I don't claim to know that. I don't claim that I can
No.
find empirical evidence that what I'm actually doing is actually happening,
But I know
right?
from listening to you, Sami, and I know from practicing myself that what I do from my experience, I know that it works, and I know that
Yes.
it's going to be helpful. My patients make many rewards to me by saying, "Oh, that feels better. Oh, I can
Yeah.
move again. Oh, um, you're saying I don't need to come back straight away, or I do need
Well,
to."
this is one of the, I guess, the issues that we face with the evidence-based model is that, you know, people like you and me can sit down now and have a chat, and we can talk about osteopathy, and we just said that we know that it works practically. It practically works. We see it in the clinic, and so when we go to the evidence-based kind of model, it's like, well, hey, look, we know that this works practically. Let's find out if it works in theory, you
Mm.
know. And I don't know if there's a. I mean, we're asked that we have to know that it actually works empirically, and I don't know if we're ever going to find that out, because part of our job is to actually, look at the patient in front of us as a unique individual.
So let's go back to Still for a moment, who said it's an art and a science, the art and science of osteopathy. So the science is me being able to reproduce some techniques that you've taught me. The science is following a bunch of rules around anatomy and physiology and principles of osteopathy, and being able to reproduce something that my teachers were able to do and help someone based from their experience and their teacher's experience and their teacher's experience. And for 80, still a light bulb went on for him, an enlightened person perhaps of the day, who saw this stuff coming together because of his experiences to get him to where he started to realize this. So we're carrying on those traditions, but there is an art to it. And this is the part that's hard to teach to students because they're being taught in a clinical scientific model at university. And the universities only have so many resources. And if you talk to any university teacher, I feel for them because there's more administrative time that they have to deal with than teaching time that they have to execute. But coming back to your question, it comes down, I think, to a bunch of osteopaths' experience agreeing that the changes that they're seeing happen are outcomes of the same rules that we're all following and just defining.
Yeah, like do you think, Robert, that if we sat in a room, we could agree on the rationale and the principles? But I mean, me and you can agree that structure governs function and function governs structure. We could have a disagreement about the particular function, right? Like that could happen. You know, we could actually have a disagreement about the particular function of the foot or the particular function of the shoulder in injury or whatever. But we would agree that structure governs function. So we would agree on the principle, but we could obviously disagree on the detail of it in action. And I guess I could have an idea about it, you could have an idea about it, and then our ideas would compete. And one of them may win, one of them may lose, both of them may lose, and someone else might come in with a better idea, and that's fine. I think that's the scientific method, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word. That's desirable. We want that. But I think we could all agree on those principles and how important they've been in both of our practices, and probably a lot of the listeners out there, their practices too. I want to ask you, has there been, in your experience, especially probably less so in regulation, but more so in association, has there ever been an attempt for a position statement on osteopathy? I mean, to kind of agree to what, especially the Australian profession specifically, because that's where we are. Have we tried to put our heads together and come to an agreement on what we think osteopathy is?
Many times, and whenever it comes under the banner of marketing and promoting the profession, and there's constantly in the days when I was involved, struggles to find the best definition. What would be the catchy phrase to use? What can we say out there in public or to other professionals to sort of sell ourselves? For a while there'd be an appetite to find ways in which we could promote ourselves to other professionals, GPs and other practices, and so that kind of language was always evolving. But perhaps that's helpful to think about your question, because back to the room and the couple of people chatting about what osteopathy is, they're going to come out with slightly different language for probably a similar thing they're doing, but every practitioner is going to be a little bit different, fairly unique, and their patient's going to swear that the practitioner they just saw is the best, so that always goes without saying. And I think that's why the healthcare healing professions work so well, that there's a lot of different people out there doing a lot of different subtle variations on the same theme. I've because I was working in the city, and this is before the COVID days, I'd see a lot of patients who've first saw suburban practitioners, but they couldn't get to see them because they're only open in the evenings, or they weren't open in the evenings rather, and they may have been only open on Saturday mornings and they had other things to do. So I'd see them during the working day because they could pop out at lunchtime, or they'd have a meeting and I'd be that meeting they'd put in their diaries when you could work through your day a little bit more generously. And that all changed in COVID, where they all went back to the suburbs and they didn't come into the city. So we had a very interesting COVID. I digress. Back to the issue though, seeing patients from other practitioners, other osteopaths, and some of them I knew really well, and some of them I knew so well I knew how they were going to treat the patient, and I could almost guess, but I'd test myself by saying, oh, what did the practitioner do to you? And they'd tell me the list I just thought. And I know that was the first class practitioner. I thought, God, how am I not going to stuff this up and give a good treatment to this patient and hopefully help them along and not get bad feedback to the practitioner of origin. So that would happen. But the lovely thing was treating other people's patients, osteopathic patients, was so similar and so understandable, and you could almost get not identical, but a very similar outcome to the practitioner experience they'd had with the original osteopath. I can't say that when I talk to people who've been to chiropractors or physiotherapists. With some of those professions, the outcomes are, the experiences are very different, and often they're coming to see me because one, it hasn't been successful with that other modality, and other times they just can't go and see their local practitioner. So they heard that an osteopath down the road was okay. They heard that it might be worth a change, and so they come to see me. But one of the big messages that I do hear regularly, and I think you're probably aware of it as well, is that osteopaths always put their hands on their patients and spend a lot of time with their patients doing that. And the other modalities which are perhaps not doing that as well, and where we might hear criticism, is that they're not putting their hands on their patients and the patient expected to get some hands-on treatment, or it was such a short experience and most of the time was taken up by explaining why you should come to see them regularly, or it was teaching them exercises that they couldn't remember or couldn't reproduce. It didn't seem to make a difference. And they never put their hand on the pain. They never sort of treated painful area, if you like, or problem area.
My question, Robert...
Things that
go ahead.
Osteopathy.
Yeah. My question was more to do with like a position statement, more so for the profession. Just so we can get our act together internally. I mean, to be able to get an external message out there to the public, we first got to get ourselves into order and get ourselves ordered up internally. Has there ever been an attempt by the association, either in your day or in any other time that you know about, to try to get some kind of position statement on what osteopathy is in Australia? I know there are scope of practice. I know there's a scope of practice that I guess tells tells what an osteopath can and can't do. But in terms of more so philosophically, what defines you as an osteopath, I know that also, again, the university, graduating from the university that's accredited, you can be, obviously you're going to be registered as an osteopath, but an association isn't a regulatory body. Has there ever been an attempt to try to actually define what an Australian osteopath is?
Um, I can't think of the examples that they've come up with, but yes, that's regularly a topic of interest for the professional body. They're always trying to define. So, but to when you say a position statement, the early ones were done for political points. We had to go before ministers and say why we needed to get the support for that. And then you've got the marketing side where you're trying to attract patients. And then you look at what the marketing people tell you to do, which is, oh, well, who's your audience? Who are you trying to get to? So yes, the idea, I believe, has always been around to, always have a definition. Often with a lot of these things, you end up saying, well, what don't osteopaths do? And the Australian osteopath, well, we're manual medicine. We don't deliver babies. We don't prescribe pharmaceuticals, and we don't do surgery, but we do all the hands-on part of osteopathy. Whereas the American will say, oh, we're physicians, and we deliver babies, and we prescribe medicines, and we do surgery as well. And then say, well, what's the difference between allopaths and osteopaths? And then they have to go into that same difficulty in explaining the differences. And they've got a lot of highfalutin words to make those differences, which are basically, we look at the physical body and we treat it as a unit of function, and we see the relationship between structure and function and the rule of the artery, and we believe that the operation of those principles are all part of why it all works. And so that's what they try to say with a bunch of different words every time. So,
Yeah.
I think a bit like us saying, if you're not happy with the teaching programs, you need to talk about it. And you need to get that message through and say, look, I'm trying to employ a bunch of osteopaths that can do soft tissue work, and these guys aren't being taught soft tissue work. So how come? I want to see more soft tissue work taught in the program. Is it something that you still think is important? And that kind of feedback needs to get back, because all the people that come to see me need soft tissue work because they can't get it from anyone else. That kind of idea. Or, they don't know how to, manage these conditions for their treatments. And we thought back pain was one of the basics. We think that should be better taught. And so they're the things you can talk. So to go back to the profession and talk to, is Matt Cooper the president? I think he is.
Yes, I believe he is at the moment.
Get on the phone, have a chat, and if
I have. I've talked to Matt on the podcast as well, and
right,
given
then
that feedback.
And then there'll be other osteopaths on the board and have a chat and say, look, I think we need more sort of down to the earth ground information that we can take to and talk about where you want it to go out to. So those sorts of things. If it was really simple, it would be out there and we wouldn't be talking about it. So it's obviously not as simple, because the audience changes and the population changes. And as soon as we say something and someone else likes it, the other profession might be grabbing hold of it as well.
Yeah, no, good point.
But I think
go ahead.
The thing is that you've got those bodies, you've got the schools to talk about the teaching, and you've got the professional body to talk about professional issues. And if there are issues, we need to be talking about them. And it's great if we're having professional disagreements about it. And I think we need that, but we also need to be unified in the direction that we want to end up, which is we want a better profession, and we want lots of input to make that profession really healthy. So you want
definitely.
Yeah,
I think the conversation needs to be had, and we need to have it in a respectful way that I guess also where people can also voice their honest opinion about things, and and hopefully it gets taken on board. Robert, I want to give you the last word on I guess this last question. What do you think are some of the major challenges that we face in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Where do you think that osteopathy needs to shore itself up to make sure that we have a bright future?
I think we touched on a few of those subjects indirectly by recognizing the real skill of the osteopath is to work with our patients. So to keep a good outcome from the training facilities, the universities, of people wanting to be hands-on practitioners. So keeping that population alive and in demand, and then basically training them very well to do that. So we want, I think, to really emphasize right from basics, from soft tissue right through to working on the structure, and then all the different applications that osteopaths need to be familiar with. One of the criticisms that I've heard from increasingly is how a lot of practitioners are relying on other adjunct skills. Dry needling's one to use, and I don't have a problem with dry needling. I think if it's being applied by a practitioner with good principles of their discipline, they can apply it very judiciously and get good results. But what we're seeing is patients having a majority of their treatment time with needles in them, and not very much soft tissue time, not very much physical work, and some of those problems aren't being dealt with there. I might be controversial saying these things, but I'm not saying dry needling's difficult or not good, but we might be teaching that in the undergraduate programs, whereas we could have been teaching more soft tissue, but then the practitioners might want to be taught dry needling before they come out. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know if I want more of one, not so much of the other, but I would have thought dry needling could be a postgraduate teaching, and something that might not be an undergraduate attribute for an osteopath. But I'm just picking on that one because I can use it as a simple. In my practices, we always had acupuncturists, so no one would go near needling work when an acupuncturist was working, because they were so good at what they did, and you wouldn't want to. And you were so busy doing what you wanted to do that you didn't have time, and we cross-refer because they needed both. So maybe we're all becoming jacks of trades or something like that. I think unity of the profession is a big one. And anything that's divisive, anything that separates us as a profession is never a good thing. But that doesn't mean that you can't be controversial. It doesn't mean that you can't be outspoken. And it doesn't mean that you can't be opinionated. But we all need to be able to sit down around a table or stay in a room and have our disagreements and our agreements and work through some things and then work through to an outcome. If there's one thing that I saw more often than not is the divisiveness of egos in rooms, sort of trying to be the last voice or the person whose opinion would carry and no one else could say things. And I hope I haven't been accused of that too often. But one of the things that is very important is to recognize that we're a community of practitioners, and we're a good group of practitioners, and we're in a very good place. We're not fighting amongst ourselves like some of the other professions. And I know from the APRA days that probably osteopathy was one of the most comfortable professions for the administrators, the APRA personnel to be part of, but or work with. They really like working with the osteopaths, whereas the other professions had huge beefs going down. Now, the professionals on the boards, everyone got along with, but as professions, you didn't have these big union differences with great big groups going against other big groups because they thought their type of treatment was better. If you look at some of them around. We all know some of them having big disagreements on the way in which their legislation can work or not work. Then I think the other thing for osteopathy is we've got to grow with the times. We needed to get regulated. We needed to work with governance. We needed to work with government. We needed to be in the conversations at the tables with the stakeholders, and that's where the professional body needs to come in with their issues, and the regulator needs to come into the conversation with their issues, and the council, the AOC, the Australian Osteopathy Council that accredits the programs, needs to come in, and then the teaching groups need to come in with their opinions, and those groups need to be in regular meetings and regular communication. And over the last 20 years, I know that that's come to the fore. We've been able to achieve that. So right now we're in a great position from that point of view. Have we got good supply of osteopaths around the big populated areas? No, New South Wales is really lacking, so we need to deal with that. But round the corner, we've got things like, well, we had government come into health policy and dictate terms around vaccination and how you could practice, and then local government told some practitioners they couldn't practice, and others in other states and jurisdictions could practice. And now around the corner we've got probably non-medical prescribing coming into it. So how are we going to work with that? I treat very young people, newborn babies, mothers about to have babies, right through to the very old. I don't want to be called a pediatric osteopath, but I don't want to also not be able to call myself a practitioner who works with children, because that's how I was trained. We were trained to work with all age groups. So we've got to watch out for those limitations, which we can get caught up with as well. So I think there's a couple of big things. Unity is the big one, and then really teaching good basic skills to those practitioners, those students who want to come out and practice at the tables.
Are you a fan of the advanced titling that's going on, Robert? This just come up now as a question I was going to kind of end, but seeing as you mentioned that, the titling that the Osteopathy Australia has come up with, like if you do a extra study, you can be called a pain. You could have an advanced title as a pain management osteopath, or a sports osteopath, or a pediatric osteopath, or whatever. Are you a fan of having these special titles within osteopathy?
I'm in favour of practitioners allowed to specialise, and I think that by all means we need to find smart ways to promote that, and specialisation with the new legislations that we have around means that we need to move into that area, and that's where that's come from. So if you want to have extra specialties, if we can call it that, no, sort of don't like the term special. We need to have pathways for people to follow those areas, but at the same time, they shouldn't limit practitioners who want to treat children from treating children if they don't have a title of pediatric osteopath.
Yes.
And I treat sports people, but I wouldn't say I'm a sports osteopath or anything like that. And I don't want to not stop treating older people because they say I'm not a geriatric qualified practitioner. I'm working in New Zealand these days and registered there, and I have to get my qualifications recognised to be able to say that I treat children, because if I say I treat children without having those qualifications recognised, I can't do that. So the New Zealand model doesn't work. It's too restrictive and too limiting.
But I mean, by default, if somebody has a title of paediatric osteopath, by default, the public's going to assume that person is a lot more, either more experienced or has more knowledge than just a normal osteopath who treats children. Is that a problem?
You would think that, and you would expect that, if they're holding themselves up to be a specialist. But if you have a practitioner that happens to be quite good at treating children, and has a lot of experience because they've just grown up with a lot of experience being a general osteopath, and they apply the same principles of treating big people to little people, and it works, and they know how to do it safely and competently, then why shouldn't they be able to treat them? Now, we're relying on the professionalism of the individual to work out where they're out of their depth. And we're also looking at the professional of the individual to say, well, I'm not going to call myself a sports specialist because I'm not a sports specialist osteopath, but I treat heaps and heaps of sprains and strains and other injuries that come from people in the sporting field. You know, all the kids that come in from Saturday sport, you know, have all those injuries. I treat people with concussion, but I don't say I'm a specialist in concussion. But there are some osteopaths who have specialised in the niche of treating concussion, and I like to be able to refer patients to those people and know that they have done a lot of extra work. Rosie Belford, who's concentrated on respiration and breathing techniques, her breath work teaching is amazing. And
talking about Rosalba.
Yeah, Rosalba, that's who I'm thinking of. And but I wouldn't. You know, I understand how the diaphragm works and how breathing problems come about. But if they need extra special tuition, I'd be very happy to refer to her. And but I don't know that she is saying she's got. She wants to have a specialist title registered or something like that, and she wouldn't want to have other people stopping the treatment or helping people who've got breathing problems. So it's up to us, and I think that's where the maturity comes into it. We don't nowadays have to think we need to be an expert at everything and hold ourselves out to be an expert at everything. I think we need to recognise that some of us will have great general skills and be happy at the target area, and others will want to go into special.
Well, I hope the regulator doesn't, I guess, over-regulate using these specialty and restrict, like what you say, restrict.
And that's where the balance comes into play, because the regulator is going to take advice from the professional stakeholders. It's going to take advice from the universities, and it's going to take advice from the accrediting bodies, and then it's going to take advice from public. It's not going to go alone and say, oh, you can't do this or anything like that. There'll be a lot of workup and a lot of discussion, and at least we've got those committees, those meetings, those people thinking about those things and doing those things. So for instance, if you're looking at introducing something like non-medical prescribing, well, how do you do that? Well, somewhere along the chain, you're going to have to get government to agree that they're going to recognise that. Now, the pharmacists have got that already. And I remember when 10 years ago, I was having meetings with the pharmacy chair, and we had representatives from the AOA coming to those committee meetings, and we were looking at how we could introduce that. Now, how that starts, it starts from the teaching. You have to get the universities to start teaching it. Now, they're saying, well, hang on a second, guys. We've got a full curriculum. Our budgets are committed for this number of years ahead. We can't suddenly turn around and teach. And if we do teach, what are the standards that we're going to teach to? So then you've got to talk to the accrediting body to work out what those standards would be. And they need to talk to other like-minded bodies from other professions to work out what those standards might look like. And then you go back to the teachers and say, well, we still can't afford to do it. We're going to have to run it as a postgraduate option. Yeah. And then the professional body is going to say, well, if people are going to have to pay extra for this, they're going to want recognition from it. And then you're going to say, but you know, all I want to do is be able to prescribe Panadine Forte. And it used to be across the counter when I first started. And the GP is saying, Jesus, that osteopath sent that patient to me because he wanted a prescription. What a waste of resources that was. So the government said, geez, we're wasting a lot of money. So you've got this big circle going around. So, you know, AHPRA gets a memo saying, okay, we want you to make it, you know, compulsory that the healthcare workforce supports vaccination. And so, you know, they say, well, all registered practitioners, if you want to be a registered practitioner, are going to toe the line here. And that was one of the biggest spanners in the work for the healthcare workforce for a long time. A lot of GPs, a lot of allied health practitioners all got caught up in whether or not that's right for them. And AHPRA's in the middle of the sandwich because they're saying, well, we're under government directive here. So the only way you can lobby that as an individual is to talk to your local member and influence government. So it comes back to those, that maturity around who you need to talk to and how you need to talk to them. But we've got the professional bodies to go out. I'd rather pay the fees for a professional body to go and do all these jobs than do it myself.
Of course.
Because they're probably doing it all the time and they know how to do it better than I can do it nowadays. So
especially in such a small profession.
Well, we're a small profession, but we're growing bigger.
Yeah, but you got to punch
and we're
up,
a beautiful profession.
Yeah. Hi, Robert. I want to thank you for your time this evening. We've had a great old chat. And to everyone else, Robert staying along with me, but to everyone else, thank you for your time and for listening. And I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you very much, Sami. Really enjoyed it.